What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be learning about a whole bunch of awesome tips and tricks that you can use to make your life in Photoshop a whole lot easier. So with that, let's get into it. What's going on, guys? My name's Brendan from BeWillCreative.com, home to editing tutorials, camera gear reviews, tricks, and tips. Now, if you are new to my channel, we talk all about Photoshop, photo editing, and even a little bit of video. So if that sounds like something that you'd be into, make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay up to date. Now today, just as the title says, we will be talking about a whole bunch of tips and tricks that you can use in Photoshop to make your life a whole lot easier. Now, all of the tricks that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today are tricks that I really love to use myself, and I'm really excited to share them all with you to hopefully improve your workflow and make your life a whole lot easier. Give yourself a bit less of a headache while you're editing. Now, because there are a whole bunch of these tips, I'm not actually putting them in any particular order because their significance to you is going to vary depending on what style of editing you do, what you're using Photoshop for, and all of those kind of things. So we're just going to be going through a whole bunch of tips that pertain to everything from shortcuts to hidden tools to text, dealing with any effects and things like that. So we're going to be starting with something very basic that I'm sure all of you know in Photoshop, and that is zooming in and out. So this is a project that I just created for a free-for-all contest that was on Instagram by someone that I follow. So of course, while I'm making this image, it's made up of a whole bunch of different photos, so I'm going to have to be zooming in and out constantly. Now, if you are familiar with Photoshop, you probably know that it's Command or Control plus or minus to zoom in or out. But it sometimes can be annoying to be zoomed all the way in, and then say you want to now zoom out to see the entire image. Instead of having to press Command minus a whole bunch of times, you can press Command or Control 0 and it will fit your image to your screen. So that's a really nice way to just speed up that process of zooming out. So now let's say we're working super zoomed in on our image. We're wanting to kind of get an overall look at our image, but still be able to come back to our zoom really quickly. So now if we hold H on our keyboard, H as in hotel, we can hold that and click, and then as you see, we get a little hand in this box. So in that box, that is where we were previously looking, and now we are temporarily looking at our entire image. So now while holding H and clicking, I can move this box wherever I want. And so let's say I want to zoom in right here on this waterfall. Once I let go of the click, it'll zoom right into that area in our box. Now, if I continue to do that, I can pick a new spot to zoom into, and so on and so forth. So that is a really awesome tool to kind of speed up navigating around your document while you're really zoomed in and working on the fine details. Now, I know a lot of you are likely not working with an Apple Magic Mouse, or you might not even be using a trackpad, so you will likely have an issue with navigating around your document while zoomed in. You'll have an issue panning around your image. A really easy and quick trick that you can do to help pan around your image if you do not have a Magic Mouse or a touchpad, you can just hold the space bar, and as you notice, a little hand icon comes up, and now while holding the space bar, I can click and I can move around my image while staying zoomed in. So that is a really handy thing to know about, and then it just saves you the time of zooming in and out, and you can just navigate your document a whole lot easier. Now, while we're on the topic of the space bar, let's talk about some ways that we can utilize the space bar in regards to some other tools. In this case, we obviously have a moon here, and let's just say I want to grab my elliptical marquee tool and I want to cut out this moon with my elliptical marquee tool. So I'm going to first grab my elliptical marquee tool just like this by clicking and dragging down to it. And now what you'll see, and I'm sure you've had this experience yourself if you've tried to use the elliptical marquee tool, I'm going to start over on the edge here and I'm going to drag out, but as you notice, it quickly kind of goes haywire, and now the selection is now not in the area that I want on the moon, and it's just really frustrating. So maybe you deselect that, and I try to start way over here to kind of counteract it, but you end up just having a really hard time getting it to perfectly line up with your moon. So what can we use to adjust our marquee tool while we're still setting the selection? So what we can do, and I bet you've already guessed it, is we can use a space bar to move our selections around. So with our elliptical marquee tool, I'm going to click and drag out, and now if I hold the space bar, you'll notice that now I can move my selection wherever I want. It doesn't get resized because I'm still holding the space bar, but I can move it to a new location that better fits within the moon. Now I'll let go of the space bar. Now I can readjust accordingly, maybe move it over a little more. And then now, as you see, I have perfectly selected around my moon just with the help of my spacebar. And as I'm sure you all know from experience, this would take so long to try to get perfect if you weren't utilizing the spacebar while using the elliptical marquee tool. Now, just to clarify, I can also be using my rectangular marquee tool. I can hold the spacebar and now I can move that selection around wherever I want. And so the spacebar is a really key thing to know while you're using the marquee tool. Now, another great thing that we can use the spacebar for is with our pen tool. So let's just say now I want to cut out my moon with my pen tool. So of course I'm just going to zoom in a little just so I can see the edges a little better. And as I click, I create anchor points, and I can click and drag to make my selection curve. So I'm just adding an anchor point, clicking and dragging. But now let's say I accidentally put a point way over here, and then now if I let go, I can't really adjust this anymore. If I try to click on the point, it just kind of goes and adjusts the angle of the curve. But let's say I actually want to just move this anchor point while I am still able to adjust the angle. So typically, if this happened, you could hold Command or Control, and then you can click on the anchor point to move it around. But as you see, I can't adjust the angle of my line. I have to do that separately after the fact. But what if I just want to be able to do that all in one? Now, for the sake of example, I'm just going to create a new anchor point in the same kind of situation. So now I've clicked way out here. I'm still clicking down because I'm wanting to adjust my curve of my selection here. But now if I hold the spacebar, now I can move my anchor point to wherever I want. And then once I let go of the spacebar, I can continue to adjust my line all in one click. So that really will save you a ton of time by just holding the spacebar. Then you don't have to go through and press Command or Control to move your anchor point and then play around with the angle of your selection afterwards. It just saves a whole bunch of steps for you. So again, just by holding down your mouse and clicking just as you would to adjust the curve of your selection here, if you hold the spacebar while you're still clicking, it will move the anchor point wherever you want. So definitely remember to utilize that tip to save yourself a whole bunch of time. Now, going back to my other project here, I just want to show you guys an example where I have just a whole bunch of layers here, and this is typically what all of my Photoshop documents end up looking like. I just have a whole bunch of layers, and sometimes I just want to isolate a single layer. So let's just say I want to see exactly what this layer right here is. I don't want to look at anything else. I only want to look at this layer. So of course we know that these little eyeballs here, if I just click on them, it goes away. So that means it is now invisible. If I click on it again, it is now visible in terms of our document. But let's say I want to turn off all the other eyeballs except I only want to leave this one on. So you can click and drag through the eyeballs and it will turn them all off, but that's kind of a lot of work. So we can use this shortcut to make our lives a whole lot easier. So if we hold Alt or Option and click on an eyeball of the desired layer we want to isolate, if I now click on that, it makes every single layer invisible except for the layer that we Alt or Option clicked onto. So again, I'm Alt or Option clicking on the eyeball again, and now it will go back and turn everything back on. Hold Alt or Option, click, and now I'm only seeing that layer. So that's a really great shortcut to use if you want to just quickly isolate a layer, see what's going on, maybe even check out a before or after, whatever your deal is. But I always use that shortcut, so I hope that you guys end up finding some value in it as well. Now I'm going to just go up to the top here, and I'm going to create a new layer for the sake of example, and I am going to grab my brush tool, and I'm going to create a big red line across my entire image here. So just like this. So now I have this red line, and as you see, it's at 100% opacity, 100% flow, and as you guys probably already know, I can just click on the opacity slider and bring it down to whatever I want. I could even click on here and type in a certain number and press enter to change my opacity, but there is a shortcut just to quickly go between different opacities. So let's say I'm at 100% opacity here. I have my brush tool selected. I want to now change my opacity to 30%. Instead of clicking up here on my opacity, I can just press 3 on my keyboard, and as you see, the opacity changes to 30%, and as I paint, I now have a 30% opacity on my brush. Now let's say I want to go to 70, I can press 7, and as you notice, the opacity goes up to 70%. When I paint, I have a 70% opacity now. So now if I want to go all the way back to 100%, I'll have to press 0 on my keyboard. Now if you want to go to something like 5%, you'd have to press 0 and 5 in sequence really fast. Just like if I wanted to go to 14%, I can also go 1-4 quickly on my numbers keyboard, and then the opacity will change to 14%. I can do that with any number I want. It's totally up to you, but this will save you a whole bunch of time. Instead of having to go up here and change your opacity every single time with the slider, you can just go and press the numbers on your keyboard. Now, while we're on the topic of numbers on the keyboard, we can also do the same thing with layers. So now let's just say I want to make this entire layer less visible. So I want to bring down the opacity of the whole layer. So just like our brushes, we have an opacity slider. I can click it, I can drag my opacity down to whatever I want, and it will change the opacity of everything that is on that specific layer. Now, the shortcut to that is just like our brush tool. I can press any number on my keyboard. So 4 equals 40, 6 equals 60, and so on and so forth. And again, if I want to go into any of the in-between numbers that don't land on a tenth, then I can just quickly press the two numbers in sequence. So for example, 47 or 24, whatever I want to do, I just have to press the numbers on my keyboard. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is that you do not have your brush tool selected or any kind of tool that you can adjust the opacity on, because then you'll end up adjusting the opacity of that specific tool and not of your layer. So in this case, I just have my move tool selected. You can quickly access your move tool by pressing V, and then you can change any of your opacities that you desire. So I'm just going to set that back to 100% by pressing 0. Now let's go into something that has to do with our adjustments. So for example, let's just say I have my curves adjustment layer. I'm just going to bring out the box so I can see a little better. Say I make a whole bunch of adjustments here. I'm just going to randomly go through and make a bunch of weird adjustments just for the sake of example. So let's just say that this is the adjustment I just made. And now I'm going to just go to my blues, and let's say that I'm not happy with the anchor point that I have on here. So this is the only anchor point I have. Let's just say I want to erase that anchor point. So if I hold Command or Control and I click on that anchor point, it will just immediately disappear for me. And I can do that with any anchor point. It doesn't matter if I hold Command or Control, it will delete those anchor points for me. So it's a really handy tool. Instead of saying you have a whole bunch of different anchor points, really fine tuning your image, instead of having to go through and start all over again, you can just hold Command or Control and you can click on the anchor points that you no longer wish to have with you. Now moving on to another adjustment layer, I'm just going to delete this curves layer. Now I'm just using my exposure adjustment layer, and I'm just going to bring up my exposure, change around a whole bunch of settings. And now let's say I just absolutely hate this and I just want to get rid of all of this really quick, and I just want to be able to start all over again. So in this preset here, I can just click on it and go right up here to default, and it'll make everything go back to what we started with. Then I can start my new adjustments all over again. And as you notice, the second I make an adjustment, it switches back to custom. And then I can go back to default if I wish. So you can do that with any of your adjustment layers. Now let's take a moment to look at some stuff regarding text. So now we're going to just grab our text tool by pressing T to grab our text tool. I'm just going to click anywhere. So right now, if I just click somewhere on my screen here, it'll create a new text bubble for me. And I'll just type in something random. But as you see, it just continues to go on straight in a line forever and ever. No matter how much I type, if I just zoom out, you'll see the line just continues to go on and on and on. So it's kind of annoying if I just want to say, just have the text only sit in this little area here. There's this kind of a hidden button within the text tool that allows us to tell the text where to stay. And all we have to do for it is just convert our text into a paragraph text. So I'm just going to delete this for now, and I'm going to create a new text layer, and I'm going to just type in something to get started here, hello. And now if I right click on my text layer and I go down here to convert to paragraph text, now when I click on here, you'll notice that there's a box around my text. So I can resize this box wherever I want. It doesn't change the scale or anything of my text. It just is basically saying, where can my text be written? So now if I begin to write, it'll stay to the constraints of the box. So using paragraph text is a really awesome way to keep your text in a certain area, and then you don't have to worry about your text just going in an infinite line and trying to fit it all into your Photoshop document. So now that we have this text written out, let's just add some effects onto it. So I'm going to double click onto my text here, and then it will bring up my layer styles box. Now I'm not going to be talking much about the layer style box itself, but we're going to be just making a couple random adjustments, and then I'm going to be showing you a quick way that we can copy those adjustments over onto another piece of text. So I'm just going to add a stroke, which is essentially just a colored line that goes outside of our layer. I'm also going to just add a drop shadow, and I'll just bring my opacity up a whole bunch, change my distance so then I can see my drop shadow and all of that good stuff. And I'll even make the drop shadow red. Something just really ridiculous and aggressive. Now with this, I'm just going to say I'm happy and I'm going to click OK. So now I have a white stroke around my text and I have a red drop shadow on my text as well. Now I want to just create another section of text here. I'm just going to type something else random in. Now let's say I want this text to match this text. Now it might be a little bit annoying to double click again and then make sure you go through and make sure you have all the exact same settings, when all you have to do is just hold Alt or Option, click on your little effects icon here, and then you can click and drag that up onto the layer you want to copy it to, let go, and now automatically the effects that you just copied gets pasted onto the other layer, and now we have exactly matching layer styles. This can be used on text, this can be used on layers, it can be used on anything you want. By just holding Alt or Option, you can click or drag those effects onto any other layer you desire. Now for my personal preference, I like to have my layers really small just so then I can fit a whole bunch of things in one little view here on my layers panel. But if you're more into having larger layers in your layers panel, or maybe you just have a hard time seeing the smaller letters and things, you can just right click in your layers panel and you can change your thumbnail size to either no thumbnails, small, which is what I currently have active, medium, or large. So let's go to large, and as you'll notice, now all of our layers become a lot bigger in our layers panel. Now an issue that you might come to is if I just create a couple new layers here, you'll notice that now I have nowhere to right click anymore. So I can no longer just right click and I don't have a button to change my thumbnail size or anything like that. So what we can do in that case is we can go up to this little hamburger icon here, and I can click on that and go down here to panel options. Then our layer panel options box will come up, and just like before, we have our thumbnail size, none, small, medium, and large. We can select whatever one we want, click OK, and it will change this accordingly. So those are two ways that you can change the size of your layers depending on what you're into. Now while we're still on this adorable puppy image, I'm just going to delete everything and we're going to start fresh. And we're going to talk a little bit about selections and making a selection in a little bit of a unique way. So let's just say I want to select only the pink of this hat. So in Photoshop, there's actually a feature that allows you to make a selection based off of a certain color range in your image. Now that might sound a little bit complicated, I assure you it is not, and let me prove that to you. So if I go up here to select, I can go down here to color range, and then this little box comes up for me. So it kind of looks a little bit cryptic. I have something about fuzziness, I have sampled colors, and I have this weird looking thing that I don't even know what's going on. So just to break this down for you, this little box here is essentially what our layer mask is. So don't get intimidated by it, just think of it as a layer mask. So anything that is white is 100% visible, anything that is black is 100% invisible or not selected. So in this case, anything that is white is going to be a part of your selection, anything that is black will not be a part of your selection. So as you notice, we have a constant eyedropper tool. So if I click on our image here, you'll notice that our selection automatically changes depending on where I click in my image. So depending on the color that I sample, it's going to pick other similar colors that it's going to include in that color range. Since I want to just pick out the pink in this hat here, I'm going to just select the different pinks here. But as you notice, as I click around the hat, it just continues to change. It doesn't just add in all those pink hues to one selection. So what we can do is we can just click on one color of the hat to start with, and then we'll go over here and click this little eyedropper tool with the plus on it. And then now I can go through and I can click, and I'm basically just adding more color onto that selection. So I've just clicked through all the different hues of the pink hat, and now as you notice on here, I have selected that hat completely. It has selected a few other things in the image, but that's not a big deal because we can mask those out after the fact, but we can make a bit of adjustments to that with our fuzziness slider. So our fuzziness slider, just by dragging it down or up, it's basically a kind of tolerance to the similar colors in our image. So as I bring my fuzziness up, it's basically telling Photoshop that I'm okay to stray away from the colors that I sampled by this much fuzziness. So it's like this much of a lenience. So the more fuzziness you have, as you see, my entire image almost gets selected. The less fuzziness I have, it almost goes only to the colors that I selected. So I like to have mine up somewhere around between 20 and 40 usually. So right now I'm just going to leave it at 30, and as you see, it has a nice selection of the hat and a few other things, but again, we can just get rid of that with a layer mask. So now if I go ahead and click OK, it automatically creates a selection for us on all of those colors that we have just sampled. So now if I add that to a layer mask like so, we have just selected our hat And if I wanted, I could just go through and paint out all of the pieces that I don't want anymore, like the tongue and these little balloons on the front and anything that was up in the corner here. And now I just have my hat. And so this is a really easy way to make a selection only based off of the color in your image. So if you just want to select somebody's shirt or maybe a part of a really blue sky or something like that, you can just do that by using our select color range feature in Photoshop. Now, while we have our layer mask active here, if you have ever been in the point where you kind of want to see what your image was like before the layer mask, or maybe you just kind of want to see what is going on beyond what's transparent currently, if we just want to temporarily turn off our layer mask without deleting it, we can hold Shift on our keyboard and click on our layer mask. As you notice, it puts a big old X through it, and now we can see our entire image, but our layer mask is still there, so it's kind of temporarily blocking it out, making our layer mask inactive. Now if I hold Shift and click on our layer mask one more time, it now makes the layer mask visible again, so that way we can go back and forth between seeing what our layer once was and what it is now with our layer mask adjustments. Now the last little tip or trick or whatever you want to call this one, we're going to talk about the crop tool. So I'm going to grab the crop tool by pressing C on my keyboard, and of course we all know what the crop tool does. We have it on our phones, we have it on literally everything. The crop tool will basically allow us to just resize the image. So currently, if I go and I just crop this image down, let's just say I want to pick somewhere in here like this, and I'll click OK. Now let's say I've made a mistake, I need to go back and I just want to maybe add a little more of the image up above here. If I press C on my keyboard to grab my crop tool one more time, I click, now I go to drag up. As you'll notice, there's no more image there. Of course, we had the image before, but now we can't go back to it. And why is that? So the reason that is because if you look up here, while we have our crop tool selected, I have this box checked called delete cropped pixels. So basically what this means is that when this box is checked, that means that once you make a crop and you commit to it, any of the pixels or part of the image that is outside of the crop gets permanently deleted. So that is why when I go to make the adjustment again, there is no pixels around because it has deleted all of the image that was not in our initial crop. So let's just try this again. Now I have my full image active here. I'm just gonna uncheck delete crop pixels, and now if I click on my image here, I'm gonna just do a similar crop like so. I can click OK, commit to that, and now if we go to do the same thing, I want to add on to my selection. I want to maybe just readjust my crop. Now when I make my crop tool active, as you'll notice, I can now see all around my image of what once was. So now I can just recrop and go into those other sections. So that's a really key thing to remember is when you're cropping an image, do you want to permanently delete all of the things that are not within your crop? Or would you like to have the option to go back and change things as you wish, just as we just did in this example? So with that, guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and maybe learned a thing or two about a few tips and tricks that you can add into your workflow to make your life a whole lot easier while using Photoshop. Now, if you want to see a little bit more of my work and continue to learn about Photoshop photography and all of that good stuff, I invite you to head over to bewillcreative.com to check out all of the good stuff on there. One of my most recent posts on bewillcreative.com is sharing the differences between RAW and JPEG files. In that article, I talk all about the differences between JPEG and RAW, why professional photographers always prefer to shoot RAW, and how shooting in RAW can actually make the quality of your images a whole lot better. So if you're interested in learning about that, make sure to hit the link down in the description below. Make sure to hit that like button as it really does make a difference. And remember to consider subscribing to stay up to date with more tutorials just like this one. Again, my name's Brendan from bewillcreative.com, and I hope to get you back here next time.